You are listening to the Dylan Tance Podcast. Hey everybody, this is Jim Salvucci, and welcome to our $1 Million Bash Roundtable.
It's that $1 Million Bash.
Today we're talking about the World of Bob Dylan conference that took place in Tulsa in June of 2023. For those of you who may not have been able to make it, the World of Bob Dylan conference was held simultaneously with a cultural event called Switchyard. At the beginning of this discussion, you'll hear us grappling with the distinction between Switchyard and the World of Bob Dylan. You'll first hear from Nina Goss, then the next voice you'll hear is me, followed by Erin Callahan, Court Carney, Graylee Hearn, and finally Rob Reginio. I hope you enjoy it. Let us know what you think.
I was disappointed by the whole mashup thing. I did not think that. I was very disappointed that the whole Dylan world was kind of awkwardly subordinated to whatever this Switchyard business was. And I thought that there was no presence from the center or the archives as there had been in the first conference. There was no interchange between us and the center. There was the different venues were such a pleasure in the first conference, and really just in general, I thought the World of Dylan was ill-served by being awkwardly linked to this cultural festival, as valuable as it is. And that's really I hope that in the future we will have our own Dylan verse in the future.
I mean, would you be okay if the integration were more organic, let's say, between Switchyard and the Dylan conference?
What would that look like?
I don't know. I just made that up. But the idea that maybe Switchyard has a more of a Dylan or has a little bit more of a Dylan focus, not entirely. I mean, it had Larry Campbell, right? Was part of Switchyard, so that's part of the Dylan verse. We're going to use that term, but what about Switchyard? Anyone?
I think maybe it's growing pains, because it did seem like Switchyard wasn't communicated like what it was, other than it was the conference and then we got the book, the magazine. And so I think maybe they're just trying to figure it out, and it hasn't been completely, there you go. It hasn't completely been developed into what it's going to be. But I agree that having a cultural festival is important. It just seemed really disjointed from World of Dylan, and we were subordinated there. In 2019, there was Dylan stuff everywhere. And of course, we missed 2021 because of the lockdown. And then last year, it was just Dylan and the Beats. But there was still that link with the center where we got complimentary tickets. And it just seemed that there was more of a connection there. And then I also think that one of my critiques was the cost of World of Dylan. We subsidized Switchyard. And I'm not quite sure, I still am trying to figure out how that's all connected.
Yeah. Well, 2019, was a much more immersive Dylan experience. You couldn't escape it. It was great that way. So any other thoughts about Switchyard? And
with Laura's Patreon, I was weirdly uncharacteristically positive. And I think that my feelings are a little different. The more I think about it, I think there's a lot of positives we can talk about, but I think this part of it was pretty negative. And I think it kind of is a bad taste in my mouth. And I think that's only grown with people in terms of looking back on it. The Switchyard people didn't seem interested in the Dylan stuff at all. It was very separate. The Dylan side, there was no welcoming, there was no center, there was no. And Nina's right. There is no center, but there's no center. Like, there was just nothing. It was just that lobby of a hotel, and there was no end. There was no kind of like, this is what we're doing. There was nothing like that at all. I think if this was the first time going, you'd probably have overlooked it a little bit. But having been in 19, which was such a galvanizing, wonderful presence, I was thinking too, like if I didn't know anybody, I don't think I would have left knowing anybody either. It just was. I don't know. I'm going to bring Jim. You're going to give the negative side of me. I gave Laura such positive, upbeat voice memos
It's
that
what I bring out in people the best.
I was like, well, I think this is the time to get into it. No. But I agree with everything that people have been saying.
All right. Graley, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it was a communication breakdown, because had we been informed in advance of the conference what Switchyard was and what the rationale for melding these two worlds together was, and had we had simple things like a big introductory session where we were all brought together in the same room and welcomed and had it explained to us what the idea behind this whole juggernaut was, or a closing session that attempted to bring some of those strands together, even if you weren't personally present, for all of them to see how they were, in theory, going to be interwoven together, there might have been better buy-in. And I didn't have a completely negative experience with the Switchyard part of it. I didn't take advantage of it as much as I probably could have or should have. But for instance, the Natasha Trethewey talk, which Jim and Court, we were sitting together. Others may have attended that as well. That was one of the best events of the whole weekend for me. And so the idea that had it not been for Switchyard, I wouldn't have had that experience makes me, that alone is enough to make me glad that they attempted this. But if I were being, less critical and more trying to generously assess what the thought process was, even though it was never explained to me, I would guess that a lot of it had to do with a complaint that we've all had over the years of how ridiculously white and ridiculously male dominated Dillon studies and Dillon conferences are. And you can see from the lineup of Switchyard that was definitely an attempt to diversify the lineup of major speakers, and hoping that trailing along behind those major speakers would be people who attended the conference mostly to hear, say, a Natasha Trethewey or the author you saw in the last event there, Rob, or a number of those speakers, and then ideally they would have attended some Dillon sessions and say, oh, this is interesting, and the idea would have been some kind of crossover effect where these two groups were supporting each other and interested in what they were doing. That's not really how it played out for the most part, and so I don't know if that was a missed opportunity and they'll do a better job with next time, or if they'll decide, oh, this was a disaster, we shouldn't even try to do this again. I don't know, but I agree that whatever the theory behind it was a very mixed result in terms of the execution in 2023.
Well, I would hope that the negatives would not push this off, though, because I think the positives could be built upon. And I think that the Trethewey was foundational to this whole thing. And the New York Times piece that Aaron and I saw was really, really good. But I think it goes back to this other thing. Don't throw it out. But also, and Rob, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But the other thing, too, is like, if you're going to do this and you're going to have a concern about Dillon studies, fucking talk about it. Have a gigantic, hard conversation. This is the venue for it, and say, okay, where are we? I think the generational thing is real and great and really awesome, but the other stuff is there too. Have a conversation about it, and sort of this other thing that I think you're right about in terms of like fading it in a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you. Took the words out of my mouth, Court. And I agree with Graley as well. If there are ways to integrate the other speakers that come in through Switchyard into some of the more pertinent and relevant and timely conversations going on in Dylan studies, that would be wonderful. And like Greeley mentioned about Trethewey, one of the highlights for me was the very last day, Valeria Lucelli's Echoes from the Borderlands, which was an incredibly stunning sound / documentary portrait of the U.S.-Mexico border. And she actually admitted at the beginning of the talk, I'm not quite sure why I'm here, why they invited me, but it was met with great enthusiasm, and it was one of the highlights for me. And it specifically, going back to what Grayley and Court mentioned about the issues inherent in Dylan studies being very white, being very male, being very dominated by one particular generational point of view. This would be a perfect opportunity to spin off a kind of conversation. I mean, I could think about something, this is just off the top of my head right now, a roundtable about Trethewey, Lucelli, some of the other aspects of Switchyard that brought some of the issues in terms of history and memory to the table, and how they play out in Dylan studies. That would be a kind of, fix to kind of smooth over some of these gaps between Switchyard and the world of Dylan.
But I have to say that sounds very, it sounds forced. And what would be the link? What would be the foundational premise? Bob Dylan is all things to all people. So how can we incorporate this vastness we call Bob Dylan with all these political and ethnic and voices, because Bob Dylan can speak to everyone, and here you just happen to be here in the room, and look, we can make Bob Dylan relevant to you, and we can make you. That seems that it underserves the Lucellis and the Tretheways as well as Bob Dylan. We just happen to have this diverse cultural festival, and we just happen to have all these white male Bob Dylan scholars. Let's force them in a room together. And gee, look what, I don't know. Do you think that's
a point? That's a point well taken.
Is I don't get what this, I don't.
Yeah. It's a point. It's certainly a point well taken. One way of doing it is to go back to what Court said and make the conversation part of the conference. Have a more focused conference instead of Dylan being all things to all people, and we're going to accept papers and have specific. Make it a much more focused conference in that we're going to focus on Dylan and race, or Dylan and memory and history.
I think they should. Tulsa, the place, is the foundation, is the premise. What are we doing in Tulsa, Oklahoma? What is Bob Dylan doing in Tulsa, Oklahoma? And make that the root that the whole business flourishes from.
Yeah, the Trethewey event was held at the Greenwood Cultural Center, which you really didn't get to experience that. I mean, not that it's so interactive or anything. It's mostly just things hanging on the wall. But that was kind of blocked off by a bunch of chairs for some reason, that section. But having it there, I thought was great. I was excited that it was there, because that's really the heart of this sort of Tulsa experience. I mean, there's the much more interactive, built up Rising Greenwood or Greenwood Rising museum, but that's culturally fraught in the Greenwood community. So having it at the Cultural Center was a brilliant masterstroke, I thought. But I didn't think it was capitalized on at all, even during the event. Trethewey's poem was about the Tulsa massacre and about Tulsa, and it was quite good. And her speech was quite good, and the host was excellent. And he explained Switchyard a little bit. I still don't quite get it, but but it wasn't. But it didn't connect up at all in any way, shape, or form to the Dylan conference at all. The world of Bob Dylan and the Trethewey event were just totally discrete events that might have had a crossover audience.
What a thread that Rob mentioned, I think this is sort of this is sort of goes against, I mean, we kind of want to broaden things, obviously. You want a lot of people to come to it. But one thing that could do is that the smaller version, the Dylan the Beats, was really well done. And it was the symposium style, which meant that you saw, because that was the other big complaint, was conflicts. And any conference of this size, you're going to have, I get that's an impossibility. And I like, Nina, your point earlier about the different spaces that first time was really great. And I could see where they would say, well, if we don't do that, it'll make it easier. I could see that debate going on forever. I agree that there is a really nice element with the museum and everything, but maybe there is maybe a more focused piece. Maybe instead of a themeless issue, maybe it's more specific. I know, and y'all know that I had the Woody Guthrie folks, and they asked repeatedly, what is Dylan Studies all about? It seems to be something that we as a group would probably disagree with, but their take on it generally was like, it's a very sort of traditionalist, conservative group of people talking very traditionally and conservative. Like, none of us would necessarily agree with in detail, but that's kind of the take. And I'm not going to sit there and say, well, actually, I don't think that they're necessarily a bad take. I mean, it's not an attractive take.
Well, when you have Cass Sunstein as one of your keynote speakers, it kind of there's a flag right there that this is a rather he considers himself left of center, as he said, but when you've got Cass Sunstein, this neoliberal technocrat, as one of your keynote speakers, I mean, Woody Guthrie would probably have something funny to say about that as your keynote speaker, if Dylan Studies, as we consider it, as something that's kind of vibrant and, to borrow a term, dishabituating. That was problematic for me, but I'm not going to rant on the soapbox about that right now, because I don't think that's the venue for it.
But I will say, though, that every panel I saw, with almost no exception, was wonderful.
Yeah,
and I thought that
panels were great.
The big stuff, the small stuff, I thought that Rob, the panel there was high art academic stuff. Like, what y'all were doing was high art academic. It's not going to be something that everybody in that room or everybody in that conference is going to be like, this is for me. But those three papers were just the late period, and the stuff on time, and the stuff you were doing was high level academic talk that you don't necessarily see that often. So I don't want to make it seem like needs to be less academic. I thought that was pitch perfect. And I don't think that there was any panel that I was like, what is this about? Yeah. But there was also a lot of panels to go to, so I was going to the one. So it has all this stuff there that can do something really, really wonderful. And there was a lot of wonderful pieces to it, don't get me wrong. But I think there is some meta work that probably has to happen.
Just for anyone, for those in the audience listening to this or watching this, Court is referring to the panel that Rob and Nina were on with Anne-Marie May on Saturday morning. The title of which was, where is it? I just had it. Once Upon a Time, Bob Dylan illuminated through three temporal frames. And it was a fascinating and really well done panel. So congrats.
Those are the things, though. Those thoughts have stayed with me, and stuff that was at all of our panels, obviously. But that's the whole beauty of it. And I've gone back to those considerations, but the late period stuff in particular that Nina was talking about, Anne-Marie's paper. I mean, those are the kind of things that this is so great about. You leave and you go, I don't know anything about that, and then you leave and you're like, I still don't know anything about that, but it seems really great, and I want to talk more about it.
The other panel, I mean, I agree that the panels were great. There was not a single panel that I sat through that I thought, oh, this is drudgery. Oh, why did I pick this panel? I should have been in the other. I mean, there were some tough choices. I mean, there was that. I wish I could have cloned myself and attended multiple ones. But on that last day, the 80s roundtable was fabulous. I loved it so much, and such energy in the Q&A session. You realize this is what you want out of a roundtable. And on the one hand, I left there just, with pinballs bouncing in my head about all the ideas, and that there's so much to be done in rescuing the 80s and redefining the 80s and reassessing and appreciating the 80s. And a lot of it's going to be done by the people who were in that room, either sharing the ideas they already have about it or nurturing the seeds that were planted in that room. And so thank you for organizing that and for having such a great session. And one of my first reactions was, oh, I wish this had been on day one instead of the last day, because we could have gotten so much momentum out of it. But then thinking more about it, it had to be the last day. I mean, that we were so immersed in this world by that point that it took that complete immersion for finally us to just have found the venue in which we're all bouncing around with ideas. But that was a fantastic panel too.
I was so worried because it was late. It was the last one. And they changed the room, and I was like, "Well, this is a disaster." And that turned out to be a really galvanizing moment too. And I think that just kind of, again, Jim, you're making me negative. I'm trying to be very positive, but the gravitational pull here. No. I think this is what really makes it. I think that the audience there. I mean, I wish we could have done that for all of these panels. It just had 30 minutes of audience chit chat.
Yeah, watch out, Court. I'm a black hole of cynicism. So speaking of cynicism, what else? I mean, the panels were great. I agree. Unlike the first one was a fabulous. The 2019 was fabulous. But I went to a couple panels and I was like, oh man, I missed such and such to go to this one. Wow, what a waste. That did not happen once. And that's a rarity among academic conferences in my experience. But what else did you take away? What else was great? Any individual papers, events, anything from Switchyard that you really enjoyed besides the Trethewey?
I mean, Harry's paper on humor, Bob Dylan's humor was just genius, and he was funny while he was delivering it, and it was just, it was one of the highlights for me. I think Graylee's panel with Laura on philosophy of modern song and how he kind of finds the threads. These are all the highlights. But I think for me, like, the moments where we were just kind of all together in the same place was really, those were wonderful. And also seeing what people are working on, kind of riffing off what Court said, is like, we all have such different approaches. And, I'm not going, I'll give Craig Craig Danieloff the credit for this, but he said there's this picture of Dylan that all of the ways that we approach him is filling in this picture that will give us a more comprehensive view of who he is. And like Court, you said, like, maybe we don't understand what everyone's doing, but we still get the idea that there are all these, different approaches, kind of turning the crystal to look at Dylan. And it's really interesting to see how people approach him in ways that I would never think of. So I really appreciated that, just being able to hear. And you're right, I wish I could clone myself so I could have been in all the panels. Can't.
I just want to say again, to praise that panel, what the Emery, Nina, Rob access. They, what it shows me, and this is what, it wasn't just them, and it was throughout, but there are infinite ways of getting at Dylan still. And there are some, the Dylan and the Beats, I still remember a couple of those papers that just really opened my brain to like, well, this is 2022 and we're still coming up with new ways of looking at it. And I think that's the exciting part. I mean, obviously I love all of y'all, and talking to all of you and having all those conversations are all gratifying. And to have that as a collective is great too. And to walk away going, wow, we may never have a consensus. And how beautiful is that? That's the whole great part of it. And I would hate for us, I mean, I don't think we're at the canon stage anymore, but I think destroying that in such a wonderful way is really cool. And you have so many people who are coming at it with their tool kits that are so different from mine and are saying things that are so valuable and interesting. And I think that's why I would never want to see this disappear. That's the great part of it.
Yeah, I think the next horizon then, based on what Court just said, is that we splinter into factions and we have at it. Maybe we have them different factions on different sides of town, and we come together and duke it out in the middle of town.
Dylan studies South. Dylan studies Northeast. Yeah.
Well, there was a great panel on Sunday before the 80s panel on it was titled "I Read the Scriptures a Lot," and it was two biblical scholars And of course, because of what I'm working on now, and looking at John Wesley Harding and its roots in the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Of course, that was the title of one of the papers. Go back to what Grayley was saying and what Aaron was saying about the different perspectives. I mean, these are people that were deeply steeped in biblical exegesis and genetic criticism within the Bible, and I mean that was just completely inspiring to see that. And
Was
it
that
was inspiring.
Was that Stephen Hazan Arnoff? Was he one of them?
No, he
Stephen
wasn't on
Arnoff?
that.
He wasn't on that. He was on
no.
another.
I've
There's
got it
only
right
two-
here. It was Henning Emmel, Magnuson, and Jeffrey Lamb.
Yeah.
Oh,
And it was just two folks, so they were able to speak for a lot longer.
oh, yeah.
And I walked away from that saying, I will never master this kind of interaction between Dylan and the Bible. I'm never going to master this, but I learned so much from
That's
it.
interesting.
Yeah.
We should probably say something about the musical components to the conference too, since that's one of the things that make Dylan conferences distinct from most academic conferences that we're familiar with attending. And I like that element too. I mean, some of the stuff at Cain's was very sparsely populated, and they must be rethinking the idea of making some of those Dylan only folks, or I don't know, whatever the VIP Switchyard version was. But the John Fulbright, which was a full house, so it must have been open to the public. That was a really fun show. I enjoyed that. And Happy Traum was fantastic. What great stories he had. And Margot Price, who truthfully I knew nothing about. But I'm so glad that they arranged that talk. Jeff Slate and Margot Price had a really interesting talk. She brought a musical perspective and a young woman's perspective to Dylan, which was refreshing. And then they played a couple songs together, which were gorgeous. So that's one of the things I always look forward to and generally not disappointed by are the musical elements of the Dylan conference. And that was a success.
Margot Price singing "Oh Sister." That was one of the highlights for me. It really was. That was just stunning.
Yeah. And I thought the Happy Traum presentation was amazing. You know, and my ride down to the first floor in the elevator with him was quite the event too.
Nice.
Took us about 20 minutes with all the people getting
For the Shania Twain concert.
Is that what they were there for?
I didn't know about that, and then I saw people who were in their get-ups for the concert.
Yeah.
And I was out to eat, and they were talking about it. I think it was like Chimera. They were like rolling their eyes talking about and I'm like, I said out loud, "Oh, that's what that was," and they all started laughing behind the counter.
I thought it was just a crazy series of bachorette parties.
That's what exactly I thought it was. That's what I thought it was. Big bachelorette party. But no, that's nice. She has foamers. That's nice.
What else was positive? What else did you like?
I loved Aaron's paper. I would like to say again, I learned from every line, and you put so much ardor into that, and I will remember that forever.
I appreciate that.
I would like to see more. I would like to see more diversity in the attendees also. It was the same usual suspects at almost every talk that I attended. I'm not in a bad way, but still, I would like to see some way to get. It's a difficult trip and it's an expense. It's really not that accessible an experience. And I was I went to the center several times, and you could have fired a cannon through there. I thought that it would be quite packed.
I went on Sunday after the conference, and it was packed.
Oh, was it? Oh, that's good.
There were a lot of people, and a lot of people from the world of Bob Dylan.
Oh, that's good.
Were there. Yeah, so that they did go, and there was a discount. I mean, the tickets were something like $15, and they let you in for $9, I think.
Yes,
that was the only connection between the world of Bob Dylan and the Bob Dylan Center that I could.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. I mean, you know, speaking of usual suspects, here's 6 of us right here. You know, there were a lot of people I knew that you knew. I mean, there's a few people I met for the first time at the conference. But I keep making the comparison to 2019, I guess, because my expectations were driven by that first world of Bob Dylan. And that one, one of the things I found fascinating was there were a ton of people there. There were 500 people, but many of them were not academics in any way.
Oh, not at all. It was like a convention. It felt like I used to go to Star Trek conventions, and it felt like that. And that was a great feeling. That was nice. People
Yeah.
talking about shows. It was like fans standing around with fans. You talked about shows you've been to and all this crap. Yeah, I missed that. That was a fine fan energy that I missed this time around.
I mean, they were fans, but they weren't. It wasn't that we didn't have that.
It wasn't the same.
Right.
No.
No. I also missed the tote bag, right, Nina?
Oh my God.
We
What
didn't
were
get
they
a tote-
thinking? Oh, yeah.
$200 you get a tote bag, you'd think.
Jesus.
Well, it is the only conference I
Yeah.
go to where you can buy a poster and a T-shirt, which I still find odd, but I did make the purchase this year.
They may have priced themselves out of some of that market too. You know, I mean, started off at 200 or 225, and that was the early bird special.
Very expensive.
And so you cut off, you know, grad students or people who don't have any kind of institutional support, and you cut off the casual fans who think, oh, I would go to that, but I can't afford that kind of price. So that's another one of the you know, we're having our postmortem from the sidelines, but I assume there are postmortems going on in the brain center of the Dillon Institute, and they must be questioning some of that as well.
Well, I'm hoping that maybe someone over there listens to the Dillon Taunts and we can contribute to that in our way.
Yeah, I'm a strong advocate for making Tulsa and the history of Tulsa the root of the entire experience, making that the glue that holds us together.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I really don't.
And that's the whole impetus behind the Kaiser Foundation and the Kaiser family trying to make. And part of me, from experiences in other cities, have seen this attempt to impose, I guess, a cultural life upon, because I was there for the week afterwards to do my research, and it was just a desert. I mean, to try and impose upon a cultural a city a cultural life without the actual kind of economic vitality that generates cultural life is always a difficult game to play. And so I can see, I think that you're right, Nina, in that it would be both intellectually and culturally a wise thing to make Tulsa and Dillon's placement in Tulsa next to the Guthrie Center near Greenwood the nexus from which the conference in the future generates itself from. Because I mean, after the world of Dillon was gone and Switchyard, if it brought anyone in, was gone, it reminded me of so many places that I've seen before where you've got benefactors who are like, you know, well, I'm not going to invest in infrastructure or anything like that, but I'll impose this rich cultural life and I can't criticize that, because it's given us this wonderful archive, it's given us this wonderful center, but it's very hard to maintain energy around that.
Yes.
I get the feeling that COVID really did a number on Tulsa. I feel like there was a lot of upward trajectory in the late teens that kind of got slowed down. But I agree with what Nina was saying too. I think centering that is good. And I want to be clear. I don't think that necessarily there's these huge issues. I think there's ways it could be improved upon that we're already there. A little bit more centering on a welcome kind of, this is what we're doing. I don't think there wasn't very many spaces to congregate or kind of gather. That was a complaint I heard a lot. Something like that could really just, I mean, it could be next time a completely different and a tote bag. I agree, a tote bag and a sticker.
Yeah, but I think, Court, that's a good point, because they had that Switchyard magazine launch, which seemed like a kind of welcoming thing, and maybe had they moved that to the open and explained what Switchyard was, that would have given us more of a, feeling like, a ceremonial opening to the conference, and then we would understand what Switchyard was more clearly.
They could have engineered more integration between us and the Switch. They really could have. That wouldn't be,
Yes.
that wouldn't be that difficult or expensive to have done that.
We all had Switchyard badges, and I think that was supposed to be the integration,
Yeah,
which was confusing. I came
yes,
for the
it was.
yeah.
But following up on Nina's idea about making Tulsa itself more central to future Bob Dylan conferences, that's all. I like that idea. One of the tricks to pulling that off, I think, is making it a grassroots thing in Tulsa. I mean, the idea of people coming from all over the country and world descending on Tulsa to tell Tulsa its history, or explain to Tulsa why it matters and how it can, that would be another sort of, like Rob was saying, imposing some kind of cultural authority from without. For it to work, you need to have a galvanizing event like a conference that brings Bob Dylan scholars and fans, enthusiasts to Tulsa, and then we're there to learn from native Tulsa citizens what we need to know and don't know, but need to learn about Tulsa.
Yeah, I don't want to climb up on my soapbox, so I'm going to avoid that. But this is something I'm fairly passionate about. This idea of that, what I discovered when I was there last August was that Tulsa is a wounded city, deeply wounded, historically and culturally, and it has room for healing. And it can heal, and it may be able to heal through the arts, but there's much that needs to be done. Just the disconnect between the Arts District and Greenwood. We went over to the Greenwood Center for that one event, but there was no other event that was connected up with Greenwood, which I thought was interesting, because there's plenty there, and they're right next to each other. I mean, the Bob Dylan Center's 2 blocks from the edge of Greenwood. The edge of Greenwood being a baseball stadium now, but so there's a lot to be done there too. And I think some thoughtfulness, but I don't think that's something as everyone's suggesting that can be imposed from the outside. I think it's got to really come from within, and I don't know how they would get that started, but there's ways.
A thing that I came to appreciate, one of the things I learned that I did not know. I mean, you talked about Tulsa as a wounded city, and I agree. And if you're looking for the scar, it's that railroad, that railroad line that runs through the center of town and that gutted certain communities, much the way the interstate has, in other parts of, like Cincinnati, for instance.
And Tulsa, there's an interstate that goes through Greenwood there.
Yes, exactly. And that these kind of, large bureaucratic decisions that are made to spare one community and drive a wedge right through the middle of another is on full display, hiding in plain sight if you know how to read the landscape, the topography of Tulsa. And yet that, until I saw and listened to Natasha Trethewey's talk, I just thought of it as that hassle of a railroad that I have to walk over a steep bridge to cross from the hotel to the restaurants and bars I want to hang out in the arts district. And then I realized I'm crossing over this scar of history and giving it, hardly a thought. But that's exactly the kind of thing that could and should be foregrounded in a Bob Dylan conference, of the significance of where we are and how that story of that city relates to this kind of larger American historical wounds that is largely the subject matter of Bob Dylan's art.
Yeah, Tulsa's America writ small.
Yeah, you had a whole thing on Dylan and memory and place. Then you have Tulsa centered there. You talk about region. You talk about the creation of memory, the creation of these narratives. It's all right there. Now, that might be a smaller group of people. I get that, and that's not necessarily the goal. But I think it would be a very potent mix of vectors.
That's a great idea. Yeah, and that was really well said, Grayley, as well. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Let's talk about Happy Traum a little bit, because that seems to be a high point for everyone. What did you think about Happy Traum's presentation?
He's a happy guy.
I missed it, but I've seen him before, and he's charming.
He's very charming. He gave a musical performance.
What did he sing? I've seen him do a wonderful Buckets of Rain. What did he do here? I missed the thing here. What did he sing?
You Ain't Going Nowhere.
Oh.
That was quite the.
He was a friend of mine. Didn't he do that one too?
Oh, did he? Oh, that's nice.
I don't want to steal other people's thunder, but there would be interesting to see if they did more like social things would be cool. They did that for the Beats, right, Aaron? Did they have like a social? I can't remember. Didn't they do like a social at that brewery or something?
Yeah, we had that first night, and Nina.
Oh,
and
right.
Charlie, but yeah, and I think Grayley was there too because we walked over with Grayley. That was the opening night. But yeah, I think having more stuff like that and maybe kind of getting us out of the hotel would be nice. But I think the one big social thing was the opening of Switchyard, where we all kind of congregated in that little hallway and ate the food they had out for us, but which was very generous and lovely, and but it wasn't conducive to really being social, I think. But you're right, they did have that meet and greet at the brewery that night. I thought Grail's talk was good. I'm going to say that. I think it was really interesting, and I also felt that more than 2019, Grail was much more accessible, and he seemed kinder, maybe, if that's a word. But because in 2019, I feel like he flew in, he did his talk, and he left, and he didn't really engage, and he walked up to people. He walked up to Harry after Harry's presentation. I saw him nodding in Rob and Nina's presentation, and there was a point you made, Rob, and I don't have my notes in front of me, and I should, but when you made it, he nodded, and then he said something similar in his talk right after. So apparently you and Grail agree, but I really enjoyed his presentation.
I agree. I liked the Grill Marcus. I mean, it took him a while to steer the ship toward Dylan, like 30 or 40 minutes. And so for a while, I thought what he's saying is interesting, but I don't see what it has to do with Dylan. But then eventually he brought it around, and I did realize how he was setting up certain points for later in the talk for early. And you had made the point, Aaron, when we were walking afterwards, and I totally agreed that he seems to genuinely enjoy being part of this community, right? And he said something at the beginning how people bring their A games to this conference, that that they're not just writing something on the plane or just getting up in front of us and winging it, that people care about the work they're sharing here, and they want to do a good job because they care about the people in that audience listening to it. And you got the sense that he identifies as part of that community, that if there was a kind of prima donna air at an earlier conference, that was not the vibe he was giving off at this one. So that was,
I agree.
He wasn't bringing down stone tablets from on high. He was down there with us, and it was a good talk. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, but if you remember, and maybe 2019 was so new that he didn't know what it was, but he told the story before his talk in 2019, also a keynote, that he was going to do the talk, and he called up Bob Dylan, and we were like, oh, we don't have that access. How lovely for you. But this time he didn't talk about himself. He talked about us, and you're right, of being part of the community, and it was much more generous, and it softened him a lot, for me at least. And I agree, it took him a while to kind of get around to Dylan, but I thought it was a really, really interesting and compelling talk.
I liked the talk too, and I kind of like the fact that he had like a 35-minute. I think it kind of exploded, expectations and stuff. And I like noir, so I think he was taking his time purposefully in a way that was really nice. And then he sets it up, and I thought it was a very, very, very good paper and presentation.
So, World of Bob Dylan 2025, since they're supposed to be doing this every 2 years, what are you looking forward to?
A tote bag.
Hanging out with all of you. I mean, definitely a big part of it. I mean, there are the panels, and yes, we will prepare our best work and bring our A game to it. But what I love most are the things outside the panels, hanging out with you, hanging out with the Definitely Dylan group, which there's some overlap there. In some ways it's different. I mean, the group here at Dilettantes, we're mostly coming from an academic background. A lot of the folks in the Definitely Dylan world are not. And I love having a foot in both of those worlds and an invitation to both of those happy hours. And so, yeah, it is so enlightening and invigorating and inspiring intellectually, but it's also a lot of fun socially. So I look forward to that for sure.
Yeah, I liked meeting the definitely Dylan folks. They brought, and I wouldn't, the distinctions between academic and fan kind of fell away in my conversations with a lot of folks from that camp that I don't know, that graciously came to my talk and graciously said, oh, what you said was interesting, but how about, and wow, that's a really great point. And it was really fabulous. Yeah.
All of those folks are so great. And then their depth of knowledge is so broad, and what they're interested in is so different from what kind of the expectations are. It's the real gem, that group of people, however you want to define it, generationally or whatever it is. But no, it's a really, really wonderful group of people.
I think that's it. It's a really good point, Court. And Laura and I had a conversation that when we rearranged the furniture in the lobby so we could all sit together. Grayley, were you there you came in, you were there, right?
Yeah, Jim and I came in late because we had gone to see Larry Campbell, but by the time we got there, it had just broken up. And so we had a cocktail at some place in the Arts District, but then made our way back. And so yeah, we inserted ourselves into the conversation that you were already having there.
But we were saying that there's just this lovely positivity among the Dylan people, that there are obviously different groups because of access and who we know, but everyone is so welcoming and supportive, and I think that makes for just a unique conference experience. And so I'm looking forward to that and the panels to see what people are working on and hanging out with you guys and a tote bag and of course more white men. We don't hear enough of what you guys have to say.
Let me correct you there, Aaron, and explain what you meant by that comment.
Thank you, everyone. As always, great to see the crew. Great to see the gang back together again after having just seen you in Tulsa. We're going to do this again, this roundtable. We always enjoy this. It's always a success. So thank you.
When you put this together, Jim, when you put this together and edit it, you should send it to Sean and them. Send them a link. Why invite them to here?
Yeah.
To talk. Why not?
Why not? Why not? I mean, it's public. Yeah, that's a good idea.
So maybe I will be seeing you in 2025. Maybe maybe you'll be blacklisted, Jim, and this will be our last.
No one will care that I'm blacklisted. Trust me.
The Dilettante 6.
That won't happen.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, and this has been wonderful.
Thank you. It was so nice to see everybody.
Do it again.
Great to see everyone.
Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Dilettantes podcast. Be sure to subscribe to have the Dilettantes sent directly to your inbox. And share the Dilettantes on social media.